send this out afterwards. Awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Jesse Velasquez. I am the Climate Justice Manager with the Ohio Environmental Council Action Fund. I'm speaking to you today from Cincinnati, Ohio. If anybody would like to put in the chat your name and where you're from, we'd love to hear from you and are so excited that you're here with us today. And today's community conversation is hosted by the Ohio Environmental Council Action Fund. You may see or hear me sometimes refer to that as OEC Action Fund. But we're so excited to talk to you about the intersection of energy policy and gerrymandering. And by the end of our conversation, hopefully you'll leave with a better understanding of how energy policy has been short-circuited by an unresponsive state legislature here in Ohio, and how issue 1 on the ballot in November will be part of the solution. And more importantly, we hope you'll leave knowing what actions you can take to be part of the solution. So at the Ohio Environmental Council Action Fund, we're pursuing a clean, healthy Ohio where our democracy empowers all communities to thrive in harmony with the environment. And to pursue that vision, we're protecting the environment and health of all Ohio communities by electing climate champions, holding public officials accountable, and advancing environmental justice policies. So discussions like the one we're having today are essential to linking the issues of environmental and climate justice to sound democratic policy. And in this instance, we're talking about why we need citizens to draw state house and congressional maps rather than politicians picking their voters. So today's conversation also wouldn't be possible without the work of the Environmental Jobs and Justice Act Legal Working Group, which is a project designed to connect attorneys and law students together to advocate for energy justice here in Ohio. And if you're interested in joining those conversations, please reach out to our team and we'd love to have you. Okay, the agenda for today. So today you'll hear from 2 speakers. First, Chris Tavener, the OEC Action Fund General Counsel, will give an overview of their history of gerrymandering in Ohio and how that gerrymandering has impacted energy policy at the State House. Then Jasmine Henderson of Black Environmental Leaders Action Fund and a longtime energy justice advocate in Ohio will outline a vision for what energy and climate policy could look like under a redistricting system that wasn't rigged in favor of one party over another. And then we'll discuss issue 1, the Citizens Not Politicians ballot initiative presented to voters this November, and in simple terms, will outline what the policy means for Ohioans and how you can take action to support it beyond just your vote. And of course, we'll close in time for Q&A. If you have any questions about energy policy in Ohio, the history of gerrymandering in our state, or the solution, which is on issue 1 this November, feel free to go ahead and type any questions that you may have or thoughts you have in the chat box, and we'll follow back on those during our Q&A session. So now, without further ado, I'll turn the microphone over to Chris Tavener.
Thanks, Jesse. So as we discuss the connections between environmental policy, energy justice, and redistricting, it's really, really important that we discuss the recent history of gerrymandering in Ohio. Jesse, if you could move to the next slide. So I've been eligible to vote since 2012, and in 2011, politicians in Ohio gerrymandered the state into the maps here on the screen. So as a voter, I've never voted under maps not gerrymandered by Ohio politicians. Myself and any voter who started voting in the past 10 to 15 years is the same experience. We all know the system has been rigged against us by politicians here in Ohio, and we know it impacts policy issues we care about because politicians have been picking their voters rather than their voters picking their politicians. So in 2011, these maps enshrined supermajorities for one party, in this instance, the Republican Party, and they enshrined that in Ohio for a decade, and now a little bit more than that. The Ohio House hovered right around 64 Republican representatives in the, and then there was about 25 senators in the Ohio Senate during that decade. While during the same time period, Ohioans voted for Republicans roughly only 54 to 55% of the time. Ohio has held that supermajority since 2012. In the years preceding the 2011 gerrymander, the Ohio House was much more representative of the state. So in 2006, the distribution was 53 Republicans to 46 Democrats. In 2008, that flipped to the other side, 53 Democrats and 46 Republicans. And in 2010, it went a little bit more toward 59 Republicans to 40 Democrats. And so it was that 2010 Republican legislature, almost a supermajority, but not quite, that created maps using modern mapping techniques to ensure a supermajority for a decade. 2012 through 2020. Those maps, these maps on the screen here, were appealed to the Ohio Supreme Court, but because of the way the redistricting language had been written at the time, the Ohio Supreme Court upheld these maps as constitutional. So Ohioans weren't oblivious to what was happening, and they attempted to change the rules of redistricting to stop gerrymandering in its tracks, regardless which party held power in Ohio. In 2015 and 2018, Ohioans passed redistricting reforms designed to eliminate gerrymandering, and we saw those systems tested in 2021. So hopefully this much more recent part of the story isn't new to you. Only happened a few years ago. We all lived through it. Politicians in Ohio once again rigged the game in their favor, picking their voters instead of voters picking them. This time, however, the new language put in place safeguards that should have protected us from those gerrymanders, those 2015 and 2018 policies. So on the screen, you see examples of the maps passed during 2021. The State House map on the right is a bit different now due to a redraw that occurred in 2023, though the result of that map was still gerrymander. Regardless, what you see here are what the hyperpartisan supermajority achieved by controlling the system created through those 2015 and 2018 redistricting reforms. They ignored the rules in those reforms and drew the maps that benefited them and the politicians in power. But the Ohio Supreme Court this time actually disagreed with the Ohio General Assembly and the Ohio Redistricting Commission. A bipartisan majority of the Ohio Supreme Court overruled the commission, a number that it happened so many times that I don't even remember if it's 5, 6, 7 times. It just happened a lot. Each time they modified their map in little ways, but the Ohio Supreme Court continued to emphasize that it violated the Ohio Constitution. The politicians in Ohio once again illustrated why they can't be trusted with the keys to the car, to the redistricting process. They ignored the Ohio Supreme Court, a dangerous legal precedent to set. They continued to gerrymander. And in 2022, Ohioans ultimately voted under gerrymandered maps again. And we're poised to vote under gerrymandered maps once again in 2024 because of what happened. So let's talk about gerrymandering in the context of energy policy and what it means for energy justice and environmental justice. Since 2011, when that gerrymander occurred, we've seen relentless attacks on environmental and energy policy here in Ohio. It's possible to say all of that's because of gerrymandering, probably not possible to say all of it. But when the districts are drawn by politicians to benefit themselves and their friends, they're definitely not listening to voters anymore. They can listen to other stakeholders, like we saw with House Bill 6 and the largest bribery scandal in Ohio, where a utility company, First Energy, bribed the Speaker of the House, the leader of that supermajority, and passed what some have called the worst energy bill of the 21st century. But let's take a step back for a second. Before the 2011 gerrymander, when we had a more bipartisan Ohio General Assembly, we saw promising energy policy move forward. The Ohio General Assembly passed renewable portfolio standards and energy efficiency standards, instructing electric utilities to act in ways that would benefit Ohioans, both their bottom line and their environment. As a result, we saw Ohio's first utility-scale wind projects constructed, and we saw utilities moving towards energy efficiency and renewable mixes in their portfolios. But after 2011, we quickly witnessed this new supermajority go on the attack against energy policy. We consistently witnessed attack after attack to freeze or repeal those renewable portfolio standards and energy efficiency standards. We witnessed increases to wind turbine setbacks, making it difficult for farmers to collaborate with energy companies to put wind power on their land. And we witnessed a whole host of policy designed to preference the fossil fuel industry at the expense of renewable energy and Ohioans' dollars. Senate Bill 52 a few years ago allows counties to ban solar and wind development, but they can't ban fossil fuel development. HB 507 opened up our state parks for natural gas drilling, achieving something the Ohio General Assembly had been pushing for almost a decade. And notice what occurred at the beginning of that decade, gerrymandering. And of course, I alluded to it earlier, but there's also House Bill 6 itself. House Bill 6 bailed out legacy corporation energy generation, not just the 2 nuclear plants up on Lake Erie, but coal plants too, including a plant in Indiana. And that bailout went directly on the energy bills of Ohioans across the state, regardless where they lived. Even after the FBI uncovered First Energy's bribery of the Ohio Speaker of the House and his allies, the Ohio General Assembly only repealed the bailout of the nuclear plants. The bailout of the coal plants continues to impact Ohioans' energy bills. Oh, and House Bill 6 killed the energy efficiency standards and the renewable portfolio standards too. The energy efficiency standards in particular were designed to incentivize electric utilities to create energy efficiency programs to help Ohioans save money on their electric bills. When we talk about energy justice, it's programs like that which help build a foundation for for where Ohioans have an energy grid that works for them rather than the political whims and corporate profits. We could talk about other examples too, but hopefully this story is clear. At the same time, Ohio has been gerrymandered by politicians in service of themselves rather than us, voters, Ohioans. They've passed policy after policy that does not pursue energy justice. So before I pass the mic over to my co-panelists, I want to make sure we discuss another part of this narrative that is essential to understanding why we can't have politicians drawing district lines. When they draw lines to serve themselves and their political party, they also divide communities. On the screen, we've overlaid a district that was proposed during one of the redistricting cycles in 2021, outside Dayton, over environmental justice data. This was a state house district. The colored sections of the map illustrate locations with high respiratory indexes, that is, these communities with air pollution issues. Instead of keeping communities on the west side of Dayton together in one district, we see an example of a district scooping some of those communities, including them in a district with a county experiencing vastly different environmental circumstances. All across Ohio, gerrymandered maps create these sorts of injustices. Fair maps means drawing maps that make sense, that keep communities together as much as possible. And so now we have another example. On the left, we see a district drawn during the 2021 redistricting process for a congressional district in Hamilton County. The final version wasn't too much different from this one. This was the first version they proposed, and then they proposed a slightly modified one. That slightly modified one was just included the eastern portion of Hamilton County in this district and still went up into Warren County to the northeast. And what we see here is a district that splits apart communities in Hamilton County that all experience similar respiratory hazards due to their urban environment. In an effort to dilute the partisan vote of this district, politicians also divided communities that deserve to be represented together. So let's turn to the map on the right side of the screen. Some of you may remember this map from the 2021 redistricting process. It was a map developed by citizens to illustrate a better way to draw maps. This was a proposed congressional map, so the districts for who we would send to Congress. Notice how compact the districts are and how they roughly conform to geographic regions of the map. There's a district entirely within Hamilton County. There's 2 districts in central Ohio, and there's a good number of competitive districts too. If you look at the districts around Dayton and Lake Erie, this is the type of map you get when you aren't drawing for partisan goals. You're drawing to represent communities. Perhaps this is best exemplified by the fact that in the 2021 redistricting cycle, map drawers literally drew a Republican politician out of his district because he didn't vote the way they wanted him to on certain issues, including energy policy. They weaponized the process not only to benefit their supermajority, but to punish those who didn't fall in line. And when you have maps actually representing communities, you have a more responsive legislature. You have legislators who understand their districts were drawn by voters. They didn't have the power to pick their own voters. And at the OEC Action Fund, we believe a more fair redistricting system, one where gerrymandering cannot occur, will create an Ohio General Assembly more responsive to the environmental needs of Ohioans. We'll be able to have real conversations about policy that pursues energy justice. So in a few moments, we'll talk about issue 1, the basics of what it is and how you can get involved with the Citizens Not Politicians campaign to vote yes. But first, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Jasmine Henderson with Black Environmental Leaders Action Fund. She's going to tell you all about what we could have for energy justice and environmental justice if we can end gerrymandering here in Ohio.
Thank you so much, Chris. And also thank you so much for bringing up Dayton and Montgomery County. In 2021, I got to be a part of the fight for redistricting and drawing that map. So it's really great to see it again years later. And we're talking about what would a world be if we had fair districts, and that fair district led to environmental justice policy change. So Jesse, next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so before imagining, we just have to understand how both of these movements intersect. So if we have fair districts, we have the ability to pass policies that reflect our community's needs and solutions around how to solve them. And the reason being is that policy is a moral document, and fair districts impacts your policy. So basically, what does that mean? That means that elected officials and also unelected officials fund what they think are important. And the most common way that we participate and telling our legislators what we think are a priority is by who we put into office, right? And who we put into office are the very people who prioritize the policy and also the budget or the funding, right? And that's why policy is a moral budget or a moral document. And that's because where the money goes is where we think are important, right? And so when we understand this, we have to talk about a bunch of different things. And that is basically how economic divestment is a comorbidity of environmental injustice and environmental harm. And so we have to influence policy and thus the budget to be able to do this. Number two, the funniest thing happened while just doing research to validate my lived experiences of doing this work for a little bit. And that this is new. This fight is continuously new, y'all. Like we stumped Google, we stumped peer-to-peer reviewed journals. Like there is this specific area of environmental and climate justice work is still emerging, is still coming online, specifically with how voting rights and energy justice and democracy justice intersect with environmental justice. So this conversation that we're having is pretty new to EJ work, and we're in the forefront of it. And lastly, we're talking about this. We have to understand that environmental justice is mother. And the reason why I said that specific quote is because the very people who live in environmentally harmed communities are also the very people who create culture that influence us until this day. And so mother means, it's a very fun way of saying the emanation or the start of something, right? And many of the people in the Black and queer LGBTQI community, right, often are the people who are victims of environmental harm and ecological injustice, right? And so we have to talk about how environmental justice is a continuation of the modern human rights movement that began in the 50s and 60s, starting with many countries around the world gaining their independence during that time period, and here in the United States with the beginning of the civil rights movement. So we're seeing a continuation of those movements, and environmental justice is one of them. And thus environmental justice gave rise to climate and energy justice, and it has a strong history. Environmental justice has been a solidified organizing movement for about 40 years now. So next slide, Jesse. And so what could we have? And although I've already talked about it, I'll re-highlight it, that in fair districts, you have fair politicians who are in community with the very people that they serve. And so they have a standing relationship with one another where they can build with one another. And again, this is a right of us as citizens of this country to understand that we can use our right to vote, right, to influence policy. And that vote should be as fair as possible. One person, one vote, right? And this should be one of the ways that we are able to influence at the bare minimum level policy breakdown and policy impact, right? But it's also deeper than just voting rights. And what I mean by that is it's actually a holistic system, right? With this ability to have fair districts and the ability for every person to have one vote, and that vote be fair for everybody with equitably drawn districts, right? What this also influences is other parts of EJ work, which is the built environment and infrastructure and waste reduction, and also where our waste management, where our waste management goes. So what that means is when we address a voting rights issue, which exists on the spectrum of environmental justice issues, what we also do is correct other comorbidities that exist because of ecological harm or ecological injustice. Okay, Jesse, go to the next slide. Thank you so much. So how has policy already been impacted? We know that this has been a 40-year movement of accountability and demands of oversight. And here's what has been specifically created, right? So number one, before we jump into Justice 40 and the EPA Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights, what I wanted to talk about is just the mindset shift that we actually experience to be at a place where 40 years of accountability work has led to some implementation of federal policy, right? And so that is a lot of work on many leaders' parts, many grassroots leaders' parts, raising the flag around the intersectionality of what it means to exist in their community, and understanding how that impacts them, how that impacts their health outcomes, and how that impacts their right to have access to safe and clean homes, safe and clean third spaces to meet and be in community with one another, safe schools for our children when it comes to making sure that we're not exposed to environmental or ecological harm, like here in Dayton, Ohio, right, which was one of the districts we learned about earlier, that has in some portions severe lead poisoning in our soil. And so when we know these things, we have to talk about the 40-year fight that has been able to get us to that point. And in addition to that, the 40-year fight of getting the EPA created was also born out of ecological injustice with literally, the EPA, or that's the EPA, my bad, y'all, with Lake Erie catching on fire, and thus the EPA was created, right? And so these are some of the things that have taken place that allowed us to do that. Now we have state and local EPAs that are implemented and very much so active at the state and local levels. And also, we have research, right? We have a bunch of research relating around so many comorbidities of what happens when we don't live sustainable lifestyles, right? And recently, we've had Justice 40, which was through 2 executive orders that pretty much created federal support and funding for underserved and underrepresented communities that have also been deeply impacted by environmental harm and economic divestment while we're transitioning to clean energy, which is also a form of environmental harm, right? And then we also had the EPA and their Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights specifically created a legal definition at the federal level, of the executive level, around what environmental justice is, and thus plans their programming, education, and their outreach around some of those things. So yeah, Jesse, I think I have one more slide, but I cannot remember. Okay, I do. And so the final slide is talking about what would fair maps look like in Ohio if issue 1 is passed. Well, we already had the opportunity to understand what that meant. And what that meant is in 2021, we had the opportunity to work together, many people across the state of Ohio, to create House Bill 479 in the 2021 legislature, which is known as the Energy, Jobs, and Justice Act. And here are the pillars of it. It's centered around accountability. So creating an executive level office of energy justice that would act as oversight to help with correcting and the remediation of environmental harm and ecological oppression, right? Making sure we had carbon emission reduction, which was a slow ramp up on carbon emissions reduction between 2025 and 2050. Right? We also had transition communities. Transition communities was a 5-year ramp up plan for communities that had research, like you had seen previously, that Chris had highlighted with regard. Sorry, I need my water so bad. So I'm struggling through this last slide. But with the transition communities, it's making sure that it's a 5-year ramp up plan to help communities that have been impacted by environmental harm, and meaning that we intentionally bring skilled workforce development and clean energy creations to help mitigate the harm that was created around the economic divestment that happened, and a lot of times the ecological harm or oppressive things that come along with it, that allows us to transition into clean energy, because we also have to do it equitably, right? And then we have green workforce development, which was a part of the energy, or the Executive Office of Energy Justice, would be 15 clean energy hubs across the state that would be supporting BIPOC-led energy initiatives. So this would be something that we would call an accelerator, which is to help BIPOC-led clean energy initiatives develop across the state, and it would strategically be placed around 15 locations across the state of Ohio. So why is this all so important? Because number one, this is what the people need. This is backed up by data. This is backed up by science. And this is also backed up by a 40-year movement. And the 40-year movement has proved time and time again that as we correct different human rights struggles, what we're actually doing is making sure that we're correcting other things. And that is where voting rights and that's where environmental justice comes together. And we understand that if every person has one vote and their vote actually truly matters, because we have fair districts that represent what our community is and what our community needs, it impacts us so much. It impacts census data, that thus impacts infrastructure dollars that we can get from the federal or the state level that can help our communities get a lot of built environment things that we really need to sustain or recover, or honestly get the infusion that we've never had before, which is why we will have things like just transition communities. So thank you so much for this. I am going to mute and I'm going to turn it back over to Jesse. And thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Jasmine and Chris. Chris, both for that overview and the history of gerrymandering in Ohio, as well as the brief history of how energy policy has suffered over that same timeline. And then Jasmine outlining that vision for energy justice here in Ohio, and just really highlighting that need for a legislator that is responsive to Ohioans, rather than partisan political goals. And that's what brings us to issue one. And again, if you have any questions, especially for Jasmine and Chris, comments, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll get to that after the presentation, our Q&A session. But I will now turn it back over to Chris to learn more about what it means to vote yes on issue one this November.
Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, so and Jasmine, thank you for that wonderful overview of what we could be doing and how that's backed with it's a 40-year-old process that we've been a part of. So now it's time to talk about the solution that many people in Ohio have been talking about heading toward November. We're talking about issue one, supported by the Citizens Not Politicians campaign. I say solution, but it's really I would call it like the conditioned precedent to creating better energy policy in Ohio, to pursuing environmental justice in Ohio. If we can't have faith in our fundamental systems of government to properly represent the people, we can't have real conversations about environmental justice and energy justice. But with issue one, we can vote yes and create a new system designed to center the people rather than politicians. So let's talk about who is supporting issue one. Jesse, if you could go to the next slide. Most importantly, Citizens Not Politicians is supported by a broad spectrum of people from many different walks of life. Republicans, independents, Democrats all support this policy. Personally, so I come from a family that has mixed partisanship with people all over the political spectrum. But what I truly love about issue one and Citizens Not Politicians is that it's an issue that my family agrees on, whether I'm talking to a conservative or liberal family member. When it comes down to it, people simply share certain values. We're tired of a rigged system where politicians get to pick their voters, where politicians get to draw maps to protect themselves and their friends. We want the citizens of Ohio drawing the maps because ultimately our politicians at the State House and in Congress represent us. They are there because we vote for them. That's how it should work. Next slide, Jesse. Thanks. So let's turn to issue one itself, the Citizens Not Politicians Amendment. The amendment that's going to create an independent, citizen-driven redistricting commission, doing away with the system that gave us gerrymandered maps for my entire adult life. The message is simple. I probably sound like a broken record at this point, but the simplest way to describe issue one is something I've said multiple times today. It's all about Ohio voters picking their politicians, not politicians picking their voters. In a democratic system, voters hold the power, and that should extend to how we draw our district maps too. So issue one will give us fair districts and a transparent process. It's that simple. That's the top line. And what it will definitely do away with is gerrymandering, because politicians will be completely removed from the process. So, quick refresher on the problem. Right now, politicians and lobbyists have the power to draw districts to guarantee re-election. Politicians draw those maps to pick their voters based on partisanship data, rather than Ohio citizens drawing maps to reflect the communities of our great state. So we get these biased, ridiculously shaped districts, like the examples I shared earlier. And so Ohio is known nationwide as one of the most gerrymandered states. That's not a reputation we should be proud of. And that's not just a conclusion people are throwing around without backing, too. The Ohio Supreme Court ruled our maps as unconstitutional gerrymanders too many times to remember. So how it should be. Instead, we should have voters drawing the lines, not politicians. I'm saying that a lot because that's the thing to say over and over again when you're talking with people. We should have a transparent, open, inclusive process, and the power should sit with us, the people. So we can hold politicians accountable when they don't look out for us. We can hold them accountable when they pass bad energy and environmental policy, and we can have faith that our districts are responsive during elections so we can hold them accountable. So what does issue 1 do? Issue 1 bans politicians and lobbyists from drawing the lines, full stop. Most important thing it does. To really emphasize what that means, on behalf of the OEC Action Fund, I'm a registered lobbyist at the Ohio General Assembly. So what that means is I would not be eligible to become a member of the Ohio Citizens Redistricting Commission. And that's the right approach. I have access to policymakers in a way most Ohioans don't. I should be barred from being a map drawer. It also bans maps designed to favor incumbents or any particular political party. So that's the anti-gerrymandering language right there. If a map is designed to favor the Republican or the Democratic Party or to favor current sitting politicians, it's illegal. It creates the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. That's the commission that would draw the maps. That commission would be comprised of 5 individuals affiliated with the 2 major parties and 5 unaffiliated with either party. So 5, 5, and 5. We would have a balanced commission designed to represent the state as a whole. And then they would work together as citizens to create a map that represents what voters believe our map should look like. And it would be a transparent process. This is key. Issue 1 includes a whole host of provisions about how many hearings they must hold, where they must hold those hearings, both before and after a map is proposed. All the commission's processes and deliberations would be in the open. If anyone tried to influence the commission behind the scenes, it would be known. We would know. It would be a truly transparent process, unlike anything we've seen in redistricting here in Ohio. So that brings us to the task at hand. What's next? It's pretty simple. Obviously, hopefully everyone on this call is already like, yes, I'm voting yes on issue 1. But it's not just about you voting yes on issue 1. It's about ensuring everyone across Ohio votes yes on issue 1. And to tell you exactly how to do that, I'm going to turn the mic back over to Jesse, who's going to talk about what you can be doing and what you can be telling other people to do.
Awesome. And thank you so much again, Jasmine and Chris. A lot of great information on a very issue that's coming up fast. So these opportunities that you have to take action today are going to be very timely. And first and foremost, make your plan to vote yes on issue 1. So you can already request an absentee ballot. Again, these slides will be sent out, so you can have direct access to these links, and maybe you can find a way to put them in the chat as well. But you can request your absentee ballot now, and then volunteer with citizens, not politicians. Going on their website, some of the volunteer options, for example, they can even provide a training on how to speak about this particular amendment, knock on door opportunities, connect with voters, canvass community events, joining a text and phone bank, putting signs around your community and businesses, hosting a house party. And even if you don't know where to start, they can really help direct your passions. So a great opportunity to go to volunteer, as well as also to find about events that are also planned. Again, the November is going to be here before we know it. There are multitude of events all around the state. This event is actually one of them. So thank you again for attending and joining us. But for example, just here in Cincinnati, this weekend, we've got door-to-door knocking in Walnut Hills on Saturday, and I think on Sunday a community canvas event in Hyde Park. So you can find them. You just put in your location and can find events near you all across the state. And then last but not least, talk to your friends and family about issue 1. That's probably one of the more important things we can do as well, to make sure they know yes is the right answer on the ballot in November. And with that, we're here for our final section to turn over for Q&A. And let's see, I'm not sure if I have access to it in the chat, but actually, I see one of the questions here. And this might be for Chris, is where is the status of the lawsuit over the final language?
Yeah, I'm glad someone brought that up. So you may have seen some news articles about how the Ohio ballot board created language designed really to confuse voters about what issue 1 is all about. It's pretty abhorrent language. I think someone put that in the chat as the way to describe it. And so the Citizens Not Politicians campaign appealed that language up to the Ohio Supreme Court, and I'm getting the news alerts daily from the Ohio Supreme Court as to the status of that case. And I'm pretty sure they've done all of the briefing for it and everything, and we're just waiting on an Ohio Supreme Court decision right now. I don't think it's totally possible to speculate as to like what decision the Ohio Supreme Court's made, but hopefully they do the right thing and modify the language to be less manipulative of Ohio voters. If you haven't read it, I would really encourage you to go read the amendment itself and then read the language that they've proposed to put on the ballot. And it's not even describing the amendment. It's describing something else entirely. So yeah, we'll hopefully get a decision from the Ohio Supreme Court soon, and hopefully it's the right one.
And then I saw briefly, it looked like one of our participants had raised a hand. I know we're in webinar mode, so I'm not sure if we can allow them to come off mute, or if again, if you'd put your question or comment in the chat, or there also is a Q&A box.
Yeah, well, so someone put a similar question in the Q&A box, and they actually I want to address another thing they said. Worried about how this will confuse the average voter, and this is why I am glad you're flagging that, because I think it's really important for people who are paying attention to these things to be talking to your friends and family about issue 1 and make sure they understand that they're supposed to vote yes on issue 1. I had a personal friend of mine who is pretty well informed asked me about this ballot board language, and they said, so wait, am I supposed to vote no now? They thought like the ballot board had like flipped what yes and no meant because of how confusing the language is. So it's really, if we get an Ohio Supreme Court decision that keeps this language intact, it's really, really important for people to just be very transparent and be like, look, the Ohio ballot board messed with the process and the language and made something that is not accurate, but you're still supposed to vote yes. Vote yes on issue 1 to pass the amendment to end gerrymandering in Ohio. So yeah, I mean, it was written to confuse voters, I think. And I think people should say that and place the blame on the ballot board and be like, yes, that's what they're trying to do, but Ohioans are smart. They're not going to fall for it.
And I think that's a great point, because we can always refer to this is nothing new. We just saw this same tactic with the reproductive rights language being passed, same kind of confusion strategies and misleading languages for us as voters. So I think that should be a strong talking point. And let's see, again, I see the chat lighten up, but I struggle to access. Are there any other questions?
No, I think some of our colleagues, Jesse, are just sharing the Supreme Court case so people can follow along.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, if we don't have any more questions, I mean, we can kind of close out. Jasmine, do you have any final thoughts or you want to share?
No, but thank you for asking.
Yeah. Well, this webinar has been recorded, so if you know people who you think would be interested in really kind of conceptualizing the connections between environmental justice, energy justice, and issue 1, please, we'll send out the recording to everyone, and we encourage folks to share it with their networks. But otherwise, take the resources we're sharing too and say, hey, I'm going to be volunteering in my community on Saturday. Come with me. Let's go talk to people about issue 1. I know OEC Action Fund, we're going to have some signs available soon. We'll probably be able to get those to some folks too. If you're in the Columbus area, get that sign, put it in your yard. That's a good thing too. I'm very excited to put one in my yard soon. But just be thinking about those things you can be doing to support issue 1 in November. Otherwise, I think we're at a close, Jesse.
Yeah, and I will just say to look at some of those resources, like Chris said, especially the Citizens Not Politicians, because even if you're not looking to volunteer yet, the events, they also have things like rallies, office hours, happy hours, so things again to really foster this sense of a community that we have in looking for a fair map process. So just thank you so much again for everybody joining us today, and we look forward to staying in touch with you.